Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. My name is Jude Huntz. I'm the Director of the Peace and Justice Office of the Archdiocese of Chicago, and I'll be your moderator this afternoon. It is my great pleasure to introduce these four speakers. We're going to go in a different order than what might be on your sheet, just given some technical issues that we're having. Peter Hughes is an Irish Columban missionary. Father Peter has served the church in Peru since the 1960s. He's worked for decades with Andean migrants in the slums of Lima. He has also worked at the Instituto Bartolomé de las Casas in Lima and taught at the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú, the Universidad Antonio Ruiz de Montoya, and the Instituto Superior de Estudios Theologicos in the Lima metro area. He is currently responsible for the Department of Justice and Solidarity of the Catholic Latin American Bishops' Conference. He coordinates pastoral action and provides theological guidelines to more effectively implement the social dimension of evangelization for the 22 national bishops' conferences in Latin America and the Caribbean. Father Peter did postgraduate studies at Centro de Estudos Teológicos in Brazil and holds a doctorate of ministry in theology from the Joint Ecumenical Program right here at CTU. Please welcome Father Peter.
Thank you very much. This is one occasion where I would dispute your exegesis about the last being first. I was looking forward to having an opportunity to get my stuff in order. Where's the, just to begin, I think it's opportune to explain to you something about where I'm coming from. And your last point is particularly important here. For the last 4 years, I have been in charge of one of the 7 departments of what's known as CELAM, which is the Council of Latin American Bishops. Yeah. It's known particularly at the times of the major conferences. The last one was Aparecida in Brazil in the year 2007. Michael Perry made mention of it yesterday. CELAM is a non-deliberative organization. It's what its name indicates, a council. Yeah. And we try to promote reflection and services and ideas for the 22 individual national conferences in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'm in charge of the department of what we might call evangelization in relation to the social issues. The name of it is Justicia y Solidaridad, justice and solidarity. And one of the areas that, because of the signs of the times, that we have concentrated on quite a lot in recent years is the whole ecological issue, with 2 things that are sort of intertwining, and that's what I'm going to speak about now. One is a growing concern in the Church of Latin America because of the destruction of the Amazon. It's in a way, it's an old problem, but it's a new problem because of the increasing level of destruction and the amount of no return that's happening in the Amazon. Pope Francis, on his visit to Brazil 2013, he made the sort of dramatic statement to the Brazilian bishops in his own inimitable way when he said, 20% of the Amazon is now destroyed, so forget about that. There's 80% left, and the church just has to get its act together and be responsible for the Amazon. The way he put it was that the church cannot afford to lose the Amazon. But he also made a further point when he said, the great test, or the great trial, or the great challenge for the church in Latin America, and don't forget that it's sort of his church, is what we can do or what we can be in relation to the Amazon and its problems, and the levels of destruction and depredation that are going on in every level. So it's like, and I think the encyclical is important here, where he's coming from has a lot to do with this perspective, where the Amazon obviously intertwines the different strands of creation, beginning with the ecological, the rainforest, the whole question of the environment. And here it's not a question of priorities, but the indigenous people are obviously very important. And they're the ones that are being really abused by the increasing levels of investment, particularly in mining, oil, natural gas, and obviously timber. So the Amazon is kind of like, it is becoming increasingly more important in Latin America. In a paradoxical way, concern for the Amazon began more in Europe and in the northern hemisphere than in Latin America. The whole environmental movement was very quick to underline the importance of the Amazon decades ago. And it's only relatively recently that the Latin Americans have kind of woken up to the whole ecological dimension. And I suppose better late than never, you know, that's a point as well. The concerns are twofold and contradictory. On the one hand, the world of corporations and mega investment, well, they're particularly interested in it because it's like a new El Dorado. It's like a new frontier that with incredible wealth and resources. And it's kind of a huge attraction for the mega investment that's going on, particularly in the last number of decades. On the other hand, there's our concern. People like ourselves are more and more concerned and more aware of the levels of destruction. And we're more and more as well, how would I put it, not satisfied with ourselves. We have a sense of being uncomfortable about what we can actually do. How can we contribute? One thing is to be aware and to have the information and to be informed. But the other thing is what do we actually do? And that's a particular concern. Anyway, the first point is that the economic, political policies of nation states, well, very, very briefly, we know what they are. In spite of sort of minor differences between the present state of Latin American governments, where they talk of Venezuela, Ecuador and Bolivia being a little bit more left of center than the rest. I think you can kind of forget about it, because in the bigger picture, they all share the same agenda. And it's like open doors and open season for mega investment. There's absolutely no voice that's critical about this. they're just absolutely delighted with the amount of investment that's going on. And governments are particularly sensitive to any kind of criticism. So they don't look kindly on people or the movements that are ecological or that are questioning or that kind of cause them problems. So that's the first point. It's a defenseless region, particularly vulnerable. We talk nowadays about the pan-Amazon. Yeah? As you know, maybe historically, the imagination is that the Amazon is belonged to Brazil. It's true, but it's not the complete picture. Geographically, 2/3 of the region belongs to Brazil. The other third is shared by 8 other individual states: Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, and the 3 tiny Guyanas. You can't leave them out. So that's the setup. At the moment, the area is populated by about 30 million people, including about 3 million indigenous peoples from nearly 300 ethnic groups, with about nearly 200 individual languages. And these are the groups that are particularly most vulnerable. Quite a number of indigenous groups in the Amazon area are still, I don't know how you say it in English, are still undiscovered or unconnected to the whole world as it exists, as we know it. Yeah? So the present situation as regards investment has an awful lot to do with the new emerging Asian markets, particularly in China and India, that are the huge importers of precious metals and the strong metals that are particularly necessary for the whole computer industry or high tech. There isn't a kid in the world at the moment that doesn't have a cell phone. Okay? They may not have enough money or food, for the next meal, but the cell phone now is an article of first necessity in the world of today. So this is an indication about the huge level of investment that's going on in this mining area particularly. And as we know, mining is a complicated business. Yeah? It doesn't provide development. It employs very few people, and it destroys. And there's huge, huge pain and suffering that's caused all over the place, particularly for the local populations that become contaminated particularly. We've done some studies and case studies, particularly in Peru, with the help of the Jesuit University in St. Louis here in the US, that have helped us to monitor people's health in a mining town in the Central Andes in Peru. And it's very revealing that it was a big smelter plant that at a time of social conflict in the plant, where they temporarily had to close it down for quite a long time, about 1.5 years, the health of the local population improved radically when the smelter went out of operation. But once the thing began again, the problems came back. And the levels, the cancer rates, particularly in women and children, are horrific in places where people's blood are just loaded with things like lead, mercury, cyanide, arsenic. Yeah? So just can't be healthy. It's a defenseless territory because the Amazon area is subsumed into the political setup of the owning states. And there's very little votes in the Amazon area. And they have no history of being sort of major players in the national life of these countries, including Brazil. Right now, it's becoming more important, but it's still defenseless. And there's no sort of organization to group the Amazon area together and give it some sort of political clout. That doesn't exist. So there's a saying in Latin America that the Amazon was the backyard, the patio trasero, and now it's become la plaza principal. It's become a sort of an important area, but that's because of the riches and the possibilities of gold, let's say. Another feature of the Amazon today is the amount of new infrastructure. These huge interoceanic highways that are in the process of being built to open up the Amazon to the Pacific coast. And they're very controversial because on the one hand, communication sounds good, but on the other hand, they're vehicles for a model of development that's just terrible. And the question arises, do they do more harm than good, right? So anyway, that's just a few ideas about the first part. What I want to speak about more specifically in the time that I've left is two initiatives. One is the response of the church. The church, as you know, is present in the Amazon from the beginning of colonial times. It was always considered a place of mission in Latin America, where people didn't go, right? So there was always a kind of a sense or a mystique about missionaries in the Amazon, particularly those of the early religious orders, the Franciscans, the Jesuits, the Dominicans, yeah, the Mercedarians, and the amount of people that lost their lives. So it was considered a kind of a wild place to go, full of danger. Possibilities of not surviving were great up until the 20th century because of the incidence of different kinds of illness and the lack of possibilities to be able to have any kind of health assistance. So the Amazon is kind of a place of, to put it very clearly, of mission in the sense of absolute generous commitment. And that's very close to the full meaning of the word martyrdom, of giving one's life. And the numbers in the religious orders, in their own martyrology, are quite striking. Anyway, over the last few years, 2 years specifically, we have, through CELAM, began a very, I might call it an interesting process, where there seems to be quite a lot of energy and quite a lot of interest surrounding the Amazon. And in the year 2013, the year before last, there were 3 separate events held in different places. And the concern was how to build a network within the church community in the huge Amazon area. And one was held in Puyo, a small place in Ecuador, another was held in Lima, and although it was held in Manaus, in Brazil. And the idea of network began to appear with force through that year in different events organized by different groups, but you had the major church organizations involved in each one of them. So by the end of 2013, it was pretty clear that there was strong political will within the church community to form a network. And the internal climate of the church had changed with the election of Francis. The process had begun before his election. Yeah. But with his election, it got more important. And the outcome of the thing was that in September of last year, in Brasilia, with a lot of preparation and a lot of good participation, we were able to establish the creation of the Ecclesial Church Pan-Amazonic Network, right? It caused impact. I don't know how much is known about it in the social media, but quite a lot is spoken about it in Latin America. And we were invited to Rome in the first week of March, just a month or 2 months ago. And it caused quite an impact there. And it was very important because that's where the base of the religious orders and their congregations and their superiors are based. So we had 2 working days there, plus with the people from the different Roman congregations. In the 2 minutes that I have left, the second initiative, I've just time to just make a postage stamp reference to it, is that the presidencies of the Bishops' Conference from Ceylon and the US and Canada agreed to a proposal from Ceylon made at a meeting in February of last year, just over a year ago, that the 3 major bishops' conferences of Latin America, from Alaska to the Patagonia, for the first time, unite and join together and work and present a united voice in the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights based in Washington. The proposal came out of Salem. It was agreed by the presidency, and both the Canadians and the Americans accepted it, with difficulties, but they were very open and very generous. And with the united voice, we began to work for a public hearing. And we got it, and it happened on the 19th of March. What's that, about 3 weeks ago now, in Washington. And it was an historic occasion. It was a resounding success. In the hearing, 5 bishops spoke, 3 Latin Americans, and a Canadian. And the man from this country didn't speak, but he was there. And we presented the emblematic cases of abuse of human rights that are happening we picked 7 different countries. And with the help of very good lawyer friends, young lawyers that participated in the process, we were able to make a tiny bit of history. It was the first time in the experience of the Commission that the Church, in an organized way, became part of the Inter-American system, and using our charism of prophecy in the very best way to defend life and defend people where life is not possible, particularly in the environment, taking very, very great care to do what it was expressed both last night and today, that we understand life in terms of relationships, that all life is interrelated and interdependent. And we're all part of the universe that's being increasingly threatened and destroyed. So the president of the commission, she's a lady from Trinidad, Antoine Rosset, congratulated the bishops and made the church promise to have a working relationship, a very good open relationship, because both groups have exactly the same interests. Obviously, they coming from a more secular perspective, and we coming from as part of the believing community. Anyway, March the 19th was the day of the audience. So my time is up. Thank you very, very much.
Our next speaker is Christie Klimas, who's an assistant professor of environmental sciences and studies here at DePaul University. Her research brings together ecology and economics in urban and tropical settings to address questions of sustainable resource use. A commonality in her research interests is working toward ecologically sustainable resource management that recognizes the role of citizen stakeholders. She co-leads a collaborative effort with funds from the EPA's P3, that's People, Prosperity, and the Planet program. This project's overarching vision is to train a network of capable citizen scientists qualified to adaptively manage their part of the urban landscape via soil quality assessment. Please welcome our next speaker.
Thank you very much. And so even though I've done work in the Amazon, I'm going to take a step back and focus on the US for a little bit because of our effect on most of the world. And I want to also mention that one of my collaborators on this project, Shannon, undergraduate here in environmental science and studies, is attending and working on this project. I'll try to highlight what she's working on as I go through the talk. Okay, how many of you have ever received a gift where you think the person giving the gift spent more than what you value the gift at? Raise your hand. Excellent. So almost all of you, and maybe I missed a couple. We call that in economic terms dead weight loss. So that's, and there was a great paper that came out in 1993, very contentious, saying how much money we waste at Christmas in terms of economic dead weight loss. What do I mean by this? What is wasted money? Well, let's say my husband, who's also here, buys me a Fiesta basket at a cost of $25. And he could have, now he's a smart guy, he would never buy me this Fiesta basket. He just gets picked on in most of my talks. He could have bought me sea salted caramels. Exactly, same price, right? So, but how is this wasted? He has shown his love for me by buying me an equivalently priced gift, right? $25 versus almost $25. So what am I talking about here in terms of waste? Well, I would have only spent $10 on the Fiesta basket. The tortilla chips are pretty nice. I like tortilla chips. But I would have spent, so there's $15 in essence that could have been better spent, because I don't really value the Fiesta basket very highly. But it gets even worse. I would have spent $30 for the sea salted caramels. In essence, I'm getting a $5 additional of value from the sea salted caramels that I don't get from the Fiesta basket. So that's my consumer surplus. That's what I get that I wouldn't actually pay for. So now he could have done better by $20. So he's in essence thrown $20 away in his purchase. So if we look at this is just right now an optimization between my husband and me, right? But what if we look at this a little more broadly? So let's say that he had put that $25 into clean drinking water in Gambia, and with the CRS, the Catholic Relief Services Project. Now, let's say that because it's not chocolate, I value that gift a little less. So I value it at what he spent. I value it at $25. But the value to society, so if you add that $25 that I value the gift at to the potential value to society, let's say it's $50, then that gift is worth $75 overall. So that means in terms of dead weight loss to society, there's a loss of $65 between the Fiesta gift basket and what he could have bought. Honestly, $50 is probably an underestimate, because with money, those who have more money tend to get less enjoyment from their money or utility in economic terms than those who have less money. So it's quite possible that the $50 that I'm claiming the well in Gambia is worth looks more like $150. So why am I even talking about this? Who cares? Well, in essence, we are throwing money away as a society. Anytime I give someone a gift that they value less than what I paid for it, that money could have been better spent on something else. Some estimates, in particular Joe Waldfogel, who's really started this this line of economic research, estimates that there's a 10 to 33% loss in terms of most gifts. And other research has looked, and it's pretty much across the board. So you can calculate this dead weight loss with the exception of kids. Kids tend to enjoy anything you give them up to a certain age. So discounting children's presents up to a certain age, we see a lot of loss. If this were a government program, if I told you that the government was in essence inefficiently spending 10 to 33% of our money, we'd be up in arms, right? But we do this. So an estimate from 2007 is that we in the US spend $66 billion on holiday purchases. And of that $66 billion, $12 billion is wasted. So Professor Megan McKenna said that Christianity is not about feeding yourself. Christianity begins with what people do with the leftovers. If in essence, if the celebration of the birth of Christ involves destruction of money, then this is potentially something that we really need to evaluate. How can this holiday really reflect our values in the faith tradition? There's no shortage of suggestions about what we could do to give better gifts. We can give cash. It's hard to do better than cash unless you really know the person quite well. Gift cards, charitable gift cards, in-store gift cards, this is novel, that would transfer the unused funds back to charity. And yet, this may be difficult. I understand that what I'm proposing may not be what the Christmas gift exchange really means in cultural terms. So this quote was from a survey of environmentally engaged households where they looked at sort of why people give gifts and how people feel about charitable giving. And this was a family that did a lot of charitable giving at Christmas, and they very much enjoyed it, but individuals in the family, in this case Brad, didn't want sort of his spouse to show her love for him with giving someone else in a third world country a goat. So in essence, he didn't want what Heifer and other organizations want. sort of to be your gifts. So this may not be, charitable gifts may not be sort of the way forward for $66 billion worth of spending. So, and then there we have to ask, why do we give gifts? So what do gifts do? Honestly, gifts, whenever I give a gift, I don't necessarily think about maximizing the economic value of that transaction, or necessarily the social and environmental value of that transaction. So there must be more to gift giving than what I've mentioned so far. And this is from economic anthropology. The give and take of gifts in everyday life creates, maintains, and strengthens various social bonds, be they cooperative, competitive, or antagonistic. So I give gifts more than just to give people cash, right? Otherwise we'd all just give each other cash anytime we wanted to show our affection for one another. But the question that really I want to get at is, sort of what ethics should frame our Christmas gift giving. And Pope John Paul II said, modern society will find no solution to the ecological problem unless it takes a serious look at its lifestyle. In many parts of the world, society is given to instant gratification and consumerism while remaining indifferent to the damage which they cause. It's the damage which they cause that I want to focus on for the remainder of my time. So if charitable gift giving isn't going to dominate our Christmas gift time purchases, then let's talk a little bit about conscious consumerism. And quantifying the impacts of different purchases may be a way to move forward. And an example I always use in class, which I find resonates with my students, is, if I'm looking at different cell phones, and I look and I say, this cell phone, 0.01 people died in the production of this cell phone, 0.03 people died in the production of this cell phone, I'll choose this cell phone. And while it's not that grave, what I'd really like to do is quantify both environmental and social impacts of different categories of purchases. This ties into life cycle assessment. This is an engineering technology where you look at what goes in to making any given thing, be it Fiesta gift baskets or chocolate or cell phones, and the different phases of the production of that item, and then what the outputs are in terms of greenhouse gases, in terms of nutrient loading into water bodies, in terms of waste, and other releases. And I'd like to adapt this to eventually look at some of the social impacts in a more qualitative way. This can get pretty complex. This is a process flow diagram of a pen. So here you have, on the left, you have extraction of oil, and that oil goes into the actual pen itself. The growth of the sugar cane goes into the ink that goes into that pen. The bauxite, or the precursor to aluminum, goes into the metal components of the pen, and then you have all the energy in the lower part. So this is just a simple pen, many of which, many of you have one in your hand right now. The three items that we're going to start with as sort of my research team are a comparison between books and Blu-rays, which are two common gift items for people that sometimes you don't know very well, and jewelry. Why jewelry? Well, almost a quarter of spending on jewelry happens in December. So it is very much a quintessential Christmas gift. Shannon, whom I mentioned over there, is working on jewelry, and she'll be quantifying some of these impacts. Well, initially what we're looking at is what's already out there, and there's been talk of mining already. This is an analysis of all the metals that are mined and their impact in terms of global warming potential. It's a very interesting study. So what you can see from this is that precious metals, including the red, orange, and some of the lighter orange, have the highest environmental burdens per kilogram. That being said, we don't mine them in the quantities that we mine some of the other metals, but they're very, in terms of their global warming potential, very high impact. And some of the industrial metals, like iron, are at the lower end of the impact scale. So how does this go into our jewelry purchases? Well, I don't have any information on diamonds for you yet. I hope to have that soon, diamonds as compared to gems. Now, it's good to know this very general information, but what's even more interesting about life cycle analysis is if you think back to that diagram of the pen, here, I can actually look at how much of that impact occurs in each of these boxes or exchanges. So I can look and see whether there are places where I can improve upon my Christmas gifts, which is useful for firms and companies and things like that, or whether maybe I should just, go from jewelry to chocolates. That would be an easy step for me. I'm a huge fan of chocolate. But here what you can see is these are again the different metals, and this is somewhat of a busy slide, but you can see that in many of your lower metals, the mining stage is not the largest contributor to greenhouse gases. It's actually the purification stage, although you can see that in the middle, that's less the case. The blue is the mining in concentration, the green is the purification, red is refining, and orange is purification and refining. So you can see that there's a lot of variability in all of these metals. So this is we've just started this research project, I'm very excited about it, and yet you could argue, you could all sit there and tell me that this isn't going further or far enough, that this is really just a small piece, conscious consumption. And I would agree with you. I don't actually think this goes far enough. I think it's potentially a first step, but not a last step. And I really think Benedict said it well when he said what is needed is an effective shift in mentality, which can lead to the adoption of new lifestyles in which the quest for truth, beauty, goodness, and communion with others for the sake of common growth are the factors which determine consumer choices, savings, and investment. So I think this maybe brings me back to the initial part with the well in Gambia, where we talk about the fact that maybe we should be making our decisions with everyone in mind, with the full relationships, not just the full environmental costs, but the full relationship costs, or global relationship costs, or the cost to society as part of the equation. Any questions?
Thank you. That reminds me of the quip that if the wise men were women, they would have brought more useful gifts. So, our next speaker is Father Edward Obi, who is a priest of the Missionary Society of St. Paul, as well as executive director of the Gas Alert for Sustainable Initiative in the Port Harcourt, Nigeria, and executive secretary of the Niger Delta Catholic Bishops Forum. In this latter role, he steers the bishop's advocacy for good governance, safe environments, and corporate responsibility in the Niger Delta region. His interest in environmental issues comes from firsthand experience of the deficits arising from environmental damage caused, in part, by the oil activities in the region. He's been lecturing in social ethics at the Catholic Institute of West Africa in Port Harcourt. After completing his initial academic formation in Nigeria, he worked for 15 years as a missionary in Botswana, South Africa, and Nigeria before taking up research in moral theology, social ethics at the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium. Please welcome Father Edward.
What's the process you follow to get this proof? I can't tell you. I can't tell you that. It's my own. If I tell you, you tell it to them, they call it up. I can't eat, so I can't tell you that.
This is the production boom.
It's gone far. Up until 2008, 2009, illegal oil refineries were not that rampant in the Delta. Now it's extended from rivers, the creeks in River State, to Bayelsa State, to Delta State, maybe even to Ondo State.
It is something which has swept, cut across the whole Niger Delta states, from Ondo State down to Delta, Edo, Rivers, Bayelsa, Kwaibom, like that.
It is very extensive today.
What is happening in the Niger Delta with youth, men and women, boys and girls, exposing themselves to these hydrocarbons and the gaseous effluents that come from there? I mean, this is a dangerous thing.
People outside the Niger Delta especially are not familiar with the phenomenon of oil theft and artisanal refining of crude oil in the region. And this is very, very unfortunate because it has led to a situation in which this huge problem that we face in Nigeria is not being discussed. Certainly, it's not being discussed with the kind of seriousness that it deserves.
We know that this is not healthy, neither for the refiners themselves, nor for their community members. But the bishops are hard-pressed to find a good reason to stand up and say, don't do this anymore. Which is why bishops think that there are many underlying reasons that are emboldening these people to undertake this dangerous enterprise. And it is their responsibility, and the responsibility of all people of goodwill, to get involved in this discussion and to see what better ways to help the people and hopefully bring them away from those dangerous circumstances in which they were.
So it's important to get people to know more.
So we want our own share of those things. So if you're talking about gas flaring and the destruction of the environment, it's not today, it's ever been there. So we're doing it our own way too.
Most times, and every time when you turn on to the media, the television stations, the press, Ngozi Konjo-Iweala would always tell you about economic, environmental degradation, and all that. Well, I am a graduate of University of Benin, under the tutelage of Professor Milton Yoa, Professor M.Ho Badan, Dr. Mrs. Hanyawo, and the rest of them. I have been trained, cooked, and nurtured to become an economic crusader.
There is a supply gap. And in many of these rural communities, what they see and what they use is the one that is produced by the refiner in the backyard.
These illegal refining activities, they are providing services that wouldn't really be there if they weren't doing what they were doing. In other words, it is difficult for people in some of these far-off communities in the creeks to have access to fuel, to diesel. Even when they do, it's like 3 times the price of what people buy in Abuja or Lagos. So there is a demand and there is no supply.
Even now, most of the products we buy in Lagos, Port Harcourt, and some other cities, Calabar, here and there, some of them are from the creek. They have to go around from the branch shop, go back and then pass at some of those ports and then come back to your car. And you say it is from abroad. No, it is from our creeks. When it gets there, they mix it up with the one they get from the NMPC. And that is all.
The very challenging terrain of the Niger Delta has created a situation in which, even with a lot of effort, even if we assume that NNPC, for instance, is doing all that it can do, it is still very difficult to supply oil to the nooks and crannies of the Niger Delta. What this means, in fact, is that you have people out there whose legitimate need for petroleum products are not being met in the system. And accordingly, you have a ready market for illegally refined crude oil.
These are not still different. We still go through the same pain. Only those, the selected persons, and the government are the only people that are eating. We that are eating. Our farmlands are being destroyed. The old creeks are being destroyed even before now. We don't have no fish. No farm produce. So you will still wait. The government cannot come down and clean up a place for us to farm. So if we have found a place that we can earn our own living, good. We'll do it.
You say per capita income. Per capita income to the layman, to the average man, is something else. But I can tell you that per capita income is gross domestic product over population. That is meaning that this is what it should be if everybody is treated evenly. But now that everybody is not treated evenly, now that everyone is not treated evenly, what is gross domestic product that you are preaching to us? It is what should be, and that which is not able to be. And you're telling us.
Another reason that I have to give for why this will probably continue in the nearest future is the strong sense of injustice. It is common knowledge that the average person in the Niger Delta is not benefiting from oil and gas production, or let's say from the extractive industry in the Niger Delta region. When you add to that stories about other Nigerians, sometimes not from the Niger Delta, owning oil blocks in the Niger Delta, there wasn't any special criteria or qualities that these people needed to have to own oil blocks. They just had relations, good relations with ex-presidents, ex-ministers of petroleum, and they got awarded oil blocks from the Niger Delta, and then you tell a youth in the Niger Delta that he can take that oil that is right there in front of his house. It's like, hey, we want to benefit from this oil too. Whoever wants to provide long-term solutions to this problem should think about what they can do to allow for some sort of resource control or some sort of active participation of people from the Niger Delta in the oil and gas industry. It's only normal. It's only normal.
You know, the older folks in our community says that in the past they used to go to the river and then they catch fishes with their bare hands. But now the most resilient of all the species, the mosquito, has gone extinct. No time for the constant flushing of hydrocarbon pollutants into our waterways and creeks. You know, I have a son, he's 8 months old. And you know, I fear that someday he's going to go to my age, and this will continue.
Perhaps I should just pause that video at that point. Now, the reason why I chose to start this discussion with that video is simply to give everybody an inside look into what is going on in the Niger Delta. There is definitely a situation of contrast where the land is well endowed, yet the resources are being mined for other people, for the other interests, and the goods are not reaching. As you heard, there's a supply gap. Even the petrol to run their generators, since we do not have electricity, they cannot find. It's the one that is refined at the backyard that simply comes to hand. I could also show you something else about an island called Bonny Island. You know, the image of an island is limitation. You are limited in every sense. Your land is limited. Your resources are limited because everything you need has to be within the island. Now, the islanders are watching their land every single day ebb out, get swallowed by the sea because there's constant dredging to enable bigger tankers to come nearer the shore and nearer the gas trains. The gas, of course, is being exported to Europe and elsewhere, and the local people are watching their land go into the water. Now, this is the powerlessness of the poor that I'm trying to project here. Now, my reflection would, these are simple broad strokes of my discussion. It's not the entire discussion, but I would like you to get a feel of what I'm thinking about. Now, when Jesus speaks about coming to give life and to give it abundantly in John chapter 10, verse 10, it seems to me that the vocation of every Catholic ethicist is the vocation of life, is the vocation to give life, to bring about life and to sustain life where it seems not to be present. Whether we do it in the pro-life sense, as many do, or in environmental justice issues, or women's equality issues, or whatever the issue we may take and broaden as we mature in our Catholic faith, it is all about bringing life and sustaining life. In this job of preserving life, and this is a necessity, because from the moment we are baptized and we mature in our faith, we seem to be answering this call. Now, and in order to answer this call effectively, our notion of the human person is key. It enables us to traverse that maze of ethical issues that are presented to us at every turn. The fathers of the Vatican Council, in Gaudium et Spes 51, already insist that in order to harmonize married love and responsible transmission of life, I quote, objective criteria must be used. Criteria drawn from the nature of the human person and human action. Now, one of the achievements of Christianity, it has been said, lies in the development of the notion of the human person. People like Michel have said that the history of Christianity is the history of the gradual recognition of the inviolability of the human person by men and by society, of the sacredness of man's right to freedom, of self-determination in the exercise of his conduct, unquote. So it seems to me, therefore, that it is central to all discussion that we recapture or re-articulate our understanding of the human person. And this anthropology would be a great help to resolving issues, I think, even issues as bad as the issue of oil and gas in the Niger Delta. Now, being a proud Leuven myself, and you probably are suspecting already, I cannot fail to credit the Belgian moralist Louis Janssens, 1908 to 2001, with influencing present magisterial teaching on the human person, with the groundbreaking article on the subject of artificial insemination, in which he articulated 8 fundamental dimensions of the human person: as a subject, as an embodied subject, part of the material world, interrelation with other persons, an interdependent social being, a historical being who is equal yet unique and called to know and to worship God. Now, each of these dimensions is distinct, but cannot be taken completely on its own. They all must be taken together. For every person to be truly treated as a person, we must recognize all of these dimensions. Even those who are engaged in this dangerous under-economy do not lose anything of their humanity, unless society considers them so. Now, traditional Catholic thought has always viewed the human person as a being created in its own right, rather than as an appendage to something else. This means that, as a piece of creation, the human person is complete, lacking nothing at all, and does not need anything else to explain or justify his or her existence. She is a telos, an end, as it were, in himself or herself, an incarnate, conscious, personal self. As a subject, the human person is responsible for what she does and how their life unfolds and what they become eventually. Now, this freedom and capacity to determine one's life is so important that the words of Kelly become relevant here. Any development that diminishes our capacity to be free human agents reduces us as human persons. Thank you. The church has maintained this account of the human agents, of the human person, distilled from the creation narrative that proclaims human beings as created by God in his own image. Now, this theological statement has implications that reach beyond mere anthropology. It means that between human persons and God, there is a permanent relationship which has implications for what it means to be human. God sustains this relationship by divine faithfulness and love. As long as God offers divine love, that is grace, human beings will ever remain God's image and enjoy a sacred dignity. I've taken that from Richard Hullard. Human dignity, dear friends, as embodied and yet transcendent, has been a recurring theme of magisterial teaching. John Paul II, Paul VI, and even extra magisterial, even theologians like yourselves have articulated this. And this becomes increasingly important when we think of the interrelatedness and the intersubjectivity of human persons one to the other. With regard to articulating a theo-ethic, in the 3 minutes left I'm going to try to do this, because I think that people who live in these circumstances can actually tell their own story. Their own narratives must form the basic building blocks of a theo-ethics from the Greeks. They must be able to explain the things that lead them to live life like this at almost a subhuman level. And if these stories are told, and people like you and myself, theologians, Catholic ethicists, etc., do not sleep on the job, indeed, we go out, cry with them, speak for them, then perhaps that theo-ethic is already being articulated at this point, even before I say my last word. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Edward. Our last speaker for this session is Father Rolando Tuazon, a Vincentian priest, who for a number of years worked in refugee camps, volunteering in a street children's center, the teaching at Adamson University, and organizing migrants and peasants as an NGO worker. After ordination, he became a seminary mentor, an instructor, professor, and recently he was a pastor. He's currently the professor of moral theology at St. Vincent's School of Theology and a regular visiting professor at the Seminary of St. Charles in Cebu. Please welcome Father Rolando.
Good afternoon to everyone. The topic of my discussion is becoming stewards of creation, ecological virtue ethics from the perspective of otherness. Let me start my sharing by quoting a passage from Ecological by Pope Francis, who says, "There are other weak and defenseless beings who are frequently at the mercy of economic interest and indiscriminate exploitation. I am speaking of creation as a whole. We human beings are not only beneficiaries, but also stewards of other creatures." I would like to start also by sharing with you an experience that I had with the Hanunoo tribe of Mindoro, that's far south of Manila. And in this exposure, I was able to understand the plight of the one tribal community there, who have constantly been driven away to the hinterlands and the forests, precisely because of the economic aggression done by logging concessionaires in the area. And in that particular experience, I happened to meet a Peace Corps volunteer at the time, who looked like Tarzan to me because he was wearing a G-string and also sporting long hair. And so I asked him, "Why are you wearing such?" And he told me, after staying here for more than 3 years, I discovered that this is the most practical thing to wear, something that everybody there wore during the time. And he said you just have to wash and then dry it and then wear it again after some time. And then when our discussion became a little more profound, he started talking about that what he was doing is kind of a protest to contemporary men and women and the kind of life they live that has become so extravagant, in a way depriving the future generations of the possible bounty of creation that they should also equally enjoy. That, listening to him, gave me the impression that this man is indeed a virtuous person. When we talk about and we deal about environmental crisis, normally we deal with this in terms of comprehensive scientific analysis, theories, complex theories, global agreements, policies and protocols, along with either deontological and utilitarian frameworks. Of course, that is very important because we have to indeed understand the complexity of the reality so that we may be able to give the necessary response. But I realize that there have been a lot of agreements. There have been a lot of legislations that have been done, especially in my country, when they are not, in fact, implemented or they're not being followed. And I think that led me to think there should be a way in which all this discourse on the environment should go down to the level of the everyday life. Discovering somehow the patterns of behavior, formation of characters, virtuous living, community initiatives, because that's where the battle really happens. And so I was asking myself, what would be the framework by which we could move and navigate such and bring about such kind of response? And this led me to consider some important concepts in our tradition to be able to retrieve them in a more meaningful way so that we may be able to put this forward as a response to the environmental crisis. The first concept I realize is virtue ethics, which I will discuss for the first part of my paper. And then I move on to defining, when we talk about virtue ethics, we talk about who are we going to be? What are we supposed to become? And then that leads me, when you talk about environmental issues, that leads one to appreciate what it is to be a steward of creation. But then knowing that these two concepts somehow belong to the pre-modern conditions, it is important to retrieve this from the perspective of alterity or perspective of otherness. And in a way, developing such framework, what I did in my research is to be able to investigate and come up with a case analysis of environmental activists through interviews. So I try to understand those people who are involved in environmental advocacy and activism, in what way are their personalities or characters shaped by their own engagement. And maybe from the basis of these different aspects, this may give way to a contribution to an ongoing building up of this new concept that is emerging in terms of virtue ethics, ecological virtue ethics. And my own bent would be to put forward an understanding of human persons as virtuous steward servants of creation. Let me start with the first slide. Re-emergence of virtue ethics. Of course, we're all familiar that virtue ethics belong to a long past tradition in the classical Greek, where in the pre-modern times, of course. And what became the focus here is the understanding of good human person is defined in terms of whether the person is able to reach his telos, his hand. And that is eventually his eudaimonia. And of course, Aristotle talks about virtue as the principal way by which we achieve our eudaimonia. And at the heart of this is formation of characters, in a way as excellence as defined by the community or the polis to which we belong. So, but we know that during the time of modernity, excuse me for the oversimplification of this because of very little time to be able to provide the nuances. But we know that what happened in modernity is that there were processes that involve, in a way, privatization of our beliefs, of our community ethos, and what resulted was secularism. Also, what became very important is the autonomous rationality that became universal, and also the process of atomization of the human subject. And of course, within this particular context, virtue ethics was not going to be playing its role anymore. So what eventually took place in terms of the moral frameworks, the moral frameworks of the ontology and utilitarian ethics. Okay, you try to define what is good on the basis of what is universally acceptable in terms of the maxims of the good, of the goodwill, or in terms of the maximization of pleasure of as many people as possible. But then, of course, in in recent times, I think there has been an emergence of virtue theory again, and there are some authors who started thinking about virtue ethics as a way in which we can think about our relationship with nature. And so virtue ecology, okay, or ecological virtue ethics has emerged, coming up with different authors who actually would like to talk about like examples of developing characters of paradigmatic figures like Aldo Leopold, Rachel Carson, and Henry David Thoreau, who demonstrated in their lives works of profound concern for the environment. So during this time, in virtue ethics, the question that one asks is not what deontologists or utilitarians ask, which is, what should I do? Virtue ethicists ask, what should I be? And this brings us to another central concept in Judeo-Christian tradition that may specifically offer a rich resource in addressing environmental concerns. So how do we become, in a way, stewards of creation? And so the whole concept here that I would like to present during the second part is the whole idea of Christian stewardship. At the wake of people's consciousness of the extent and impact of environmental crisis, stewardship has become one of the prominent concepts around which Christian environmentalists advocate, according to Kearns. In contrast to the other two models of Christian environmentalism, like eco-justice or eco-spirituality, the focus of a stewardship model is the fruitful practices describing how to inhabit the providential landscape created by God's special relationship to humans. In a way, that relationship defines for us our own identity, precisely as created in the image and likeness of God. And that identity, in a way, gives us a sense of dignity, but also equally a sense of responsibility. This particular framework, which actually started with some evangelical groups, eventually was also put into question by some great theorists. And we know, for example, the most quoted guy in environmentalism, Lynn White Jr., who claims that Christianity is the root cause of the crisis of ecological crisis. And he attributes that to the fact that Christianity is the most anthropocentric of all religions. Of course, because of the dualism of the truths, and also the Baconian framework in terms of technology, in a way empowering nature by humanity. Of course, there are those who respond to this critique by saying that that is in fact a misinterpretation of the Christian tradition that is we find in Genesis. Because when we understand dominion, it's not necessarily understood as domination, but it is actually understood in terms of care and protection, especially when it is understood from the perspective of the second account of creation. Okay, that was described extensively also by Father Katongele this morning. Now, there are those who would respond to this and say, let's take a look at the metaphors, at the root metaphors that operate within our consciousness, because they shape the way we respond to reality. And so what I thought would be useful for that is also dealing with that from the perspective of otherness and alterity, is the framework that would eventually overcome anthropocentrism, something that we would be able to overcome by a postmodern or transmodern critical appropriation of virtue ethics and stewardship ethics. Gibson Winter talks about artistic root metaphor that could be most appropriate in our context today. He speaks of artistic metaphor as a combination of two root metaphors that became operative. The first one is the organic root metaphor that dominated pre-modernity, and the other one is mechanistic metaphor during modernity. In organic root metaphor, what was emphasized is stability and authority in a hierarchical social order, while in mechanistic root metaphor, you talk about progress and creativity. Of course, in a way, trying to get the strength of these two metaphors, he combined this into artistic root metaphor, which in a way talks about transformative community. And it is from there that I see that the framework of Enrico de Sèvres, which is that of otherness, identified precisely with those who are excluded by the system, and that which borrows from Emmanuel Levinas, is maybe an appropriate framework to be able to address anthropocentrism in a way that would give way to a possible relationship of humans in a way contested and called to responsibility by the other. And the other here is not limited only to the poor or to the excluded, but precisely to the mother nature that is in a way experiencing some kind of oppression by human intervention. So what I did with this is to be able to understand this framework and in a way see this, how this becomes operative in the way environmentalists or advocates actually develop themselves and how they actually shape their own consciousness in the process of their advocacy. I interviewed 6 people. One is Pia Macleing Malayaw, who is the national speaker of the National Alliance of Indigenous People. She herself is an indigenous person, belongs to the tribe in the north. Another person that I actually interviewed was Henry Hughes, who was he's a member of the Buddhist Tutsi Foundation. In fact, I participated in their international conference just recently in Taiwan. And then also I interviewed Patricia Gwen Borsena, a green researcher who actually founded this and remains to be the president of that. And another one is Darwin Morales, who actually heads the SMARTS Partnership Public Affairs. And then Paulo Valenzuela, who is executive director of Disaster Preparedness. And the other one is Ray Palacio of the Eco Waste Coalition. Having talked, I actually have a narrative of each of this in my research in the longer paper. But I would just like to, because of the time constraint, I would just like to identify with you some of what I see are points of convergence in their positions after having responded to the following questions. How did they get to be involved in that work? What are their convictions or beliefs? What do they do for the environment? What impact do they have? And what virtues do they find most important in their pursuit of environmental advocacy? And this was the things that I found common to all of them are the following. First, all of them provide a common critique of the modern form of rationality and value that are wasteful, environmentally unfriendly, and socially unjust. They speak of greed and selfishness that characterize certain behaviors prevalent within the ethos of economism, materialism, and consumerism. Second, the advocates also have a shared understanding of the meaning of a good life, which for each one of them, they associated with material wealth. Not with material wealth, but with service to the environment and to humanity, especially those in the margins of society. Most of them are very good individuals, accomplished in their academics, but they have very little salary. Basically, they're committed to this kind of work. And they say they find so much meaning in what they do. And also, I found in their own responses, running deep, what's running deep in their advocacy is the fundamental understanding of their identity as stewards of creation. Of course, many of them are Christians. One is a Buddhist but remaining a Christian, and they see that what they do is their own response also to their faith in God. There is also a kind of a religious ethos that influences them in the way they see creation. They see that there is a kind of a spirit that in a way is present in nature. But that such kind of influence actually also is open there is a kind of openness in their consciousness. And that makes them see that there should be the basic respect, care, and responsibility that humanity should be able to accord to the environment. And they also, in a way, appreciate the intrinsic value of creatures, fellow creatures. Number 5, the importance of community and the need to be in solidarity through partnership and networking with other groups who share a similar vision and advocacy. All of them are well networked. In fact, they belong to national, international network because they believe that the issue is so systemic that the only way to address this is also becoming systemic. And 6th, the respondents' ecological awakening was occasioned by their experience of the poor, the victims, and the devastation of the environment. All of them, in a way, got involved with this because of some of them started too young as activists, and aware of the social issues of the Philippines, and they see that this particular work led them eventually to be also addressing the concerns of the environment. So the last point is when I asked them what are the most important ecological virtues, in response to each of those different points that I was able to gather, they say that number 1, simplicity of lifestyle is in a way a response to the greed that in a way prevails sometimes in our contemporary consumerist society. Love and generosity is a response to the second level in terms of their own understanding of meaning of life, that they find meaning in generosity and love. And integrity and consistency is what defines their own understanding of themselves as stewards of creation. If without this, the advocacy will never continue and will not actually overcome the difficulties and problems. Wisdom and justice is also another very important appreciation of this, and courage and humility in terms of their own openness to nature. By way of conclusion, I would like to read my conclusion. Based on the analysis of the narratives of the respondents, we could see that those who do advocacy work for the environment demonstrate a profound sense of commitment that touches the core of their identity as stewards of creation. Such identity is derived from a worldview that recognizes a sense of transcendence that is much bigger than oneself. There is something in the environment that makes one have a sense of awe and wonder. There is a kind of spirit that manifests itself in abundance and providence. What comes along with that is a corollary responsibility, and such responsibility comes from the other, demanding of us a certain form of life characterized by simplicity, generosity, integrity, wisdom, justice, courage, and humility, virtues that are necessary to make us servants of the other. The other here is understood in terms of the vulnerable, be they other human beings or other creatures, whose existence should be respected and protected toward a more balanced and harmonious cosmic order. The virtuous person should have the excellences that would enable him or her to stand firm his or her ground, to become authentic, steward servant of creation. Thank you. That's
Thank you very much. At this time, it's the opportunity of the 4 panelists to respond to one another, to ask one another questions. So if I think all the microphones are working there, so feel free to use those. But if any of you have any response or a question of one another.
enough. I would like to align myself very much with the work that Peter is doing in South America, and the commonality that I see between your work and the kind of work that I am doing, and indeed the contributions from other panelists here, is the contribution to life, the sustenance of life. Even when you are able to make the bold move to reach an international panel to place your case there, I guess the argument is the argument of life, where because the situation that you find yourselves in is not life-giving and it's not sustainable. Instead of a question, let me just propose that perhaps more work should be done to encourage people, broad segments of people, including the media, to engage with the discussion of giving life and sustaining life. And perhaps this might tickle more people's fancy if the emphasis is not so much about resources or the control of resources, but more about giving life to the people, however we are able to do that. Maybe it will be more acceptable, because we often get pushback from the oil industry, from big business, etc., where we are talking about they are cutting down on the resources. Perhaps if we use another approach, a more positive one, that as I see it now, of giving life, even bringing down the resources that they are engaged in exploiting to bring life to the people. Perhaps this might be more acceptable and more generally. It's just a suggestion. I don't know what you have to say.
Hello, I totally agree with you, Edward. I think the major paradigm shift as regards mission nowadays, if everybody would be agreed, would be the primacy of life as God's gift. And inherent in this statement is also the human invitation to get involved. It's not just enough to say gratuity of God's gift. Part of the gift, as we know, is the human response, and the human acceptance of the gift means commitment, means work, means human responsibility. I was particularly interested in all of the presentations this afternoon, and the thought came recurring to me about the incipient dialogue in the South, the connections between Latin America, Africa, and Asia particularly. Yeah. And I think we are on the verge, or in the beginnings of a new exciting moment in the life of the Catholic Church and the churches in general, where this doesn't mean to say that I have no intention whatsoever in sort of putting on the back burner the churches of the North. But it's probably something that's very much related to the whole population shift of where the Catholic Church is at, becoming more and more a church of the South, right? And in my experience in Sela, I think what has been tremendously important and exciting is the contact that we have been able to have with the corresponding camp in Africa and the SSC in Asia. And the important areas I spoke obviously about the Amazon, but in the meeting that we had in Rome, the bishop there that represented Africa was from the Republic of the Congo, and he made a striking comparison between what's happening in Congo and in Central Africa with the Amazon. And the same is true, Rolando might comment on it in places like Mindanao, where basically the same sort of situation prevails. On the other hand, it's in my paper, there was a report published just about less than a year ago, done by a working group that was comprised of church people, church organizations in 10 Latin American countries, and it's about the impact and the responsibility of Canada in the whole mining situation in Latin America. And here it's not to stamp on the Canadians, but 80% of mining in Latin America is implemented by Canadian mining corporations. But then again, the capital, and as old Marx used to say, capital has no fatherland or motherland, in large part comes from this country. And it's absolutely important, to really be able to understand and appreciate how the churches, both in Canada and the US, can join in solidarity from a faith perspective with the Church of the South in the initiative that I expressed as regards the three groupings participating as equal. In the previous discussions, the Canadians and the Americans were quite concerned, naturally, about the legal and juridical implications of going public in a forum like the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. But that one was put to sleep, and when we were able to iron it out in the sense that the relationship is one of a faith thing, of solidarity with our brothers in the South in coming together and trying to face the real issue, which is the issue of the exploitation, creation, the destruction of the environment, particularly of the poor and indigenous peoples. But I think we should, we've already participated together in the environmental summits, the one in 2012 in Rio de Janeiro, and there was the one recently in December in Lima. So the REPAM made its maiden speech or participation, so to speak, in the summit in Lima. And I think there's a good possibility that the church would make a significant contribution to the one in Paris, which is the final one, the big one. To not be too long-winded, it's very interesting that the encyclical is being prepared and produced now as part of the process, which is a tremendous sign of the church becoming sufficiently free and courageous to talk now, as in the lead-up to what's going to happen in December, which is going to be super important for the future relationships between governments and responsibility in relation to climate. And not, as generally happens in the church, that we always speak post-events. We have the answers, but we keep them for ourselves, and we're the people, like always, with the wise people that keep our powder dry, the war is over, and then give you all the correct answers. They seem a little bit from the book, or not really part of the process. Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay. I had one question. Father Peter, you had mentioned in your talk that you felt that Latin America was late to the game in terms of coming on board with environmental response to the degradation of what was happening there. I guess I have two questions. One is that true? And the other, is that true both in Africa and in Asia in terms of the lateness? And is that a result of, just the fact that there were other things on the plate that needed to be addressed, like the totalitarian regimes and the militarization of the areas, and was it more the fact that there were these other priorities that needed to be addressed first, and then the environmental could only come after that?
Yeah, you're right. The way history has evolved, like the famous Conference of Medellin at the end of the 60s, the title of it was How to Apply Vatican II to the Church of Latin America and the Reality of Latin America. And there, the Latin American bishops sort of said in a nice way, in a kind of an elegant way, that dialogue or openness to the modern world wasn't in the same style as a European or a North thing, where the modern world was seen more or less as people voting with their feet, no longer looking for the answers for the major questions in life, meaning, etc., particularly in the wake of 2 world wars. The whole question of atheism was very prevalent, and people looking to the spheres of science and technology more than religion. When the perspective of the Council was applied to what's the modern world in Latin America, it wasn't lack of faith, it was lack of life. It was things like hunger and sickness and death and unemployment and misery that was the major issue. There was loads of faith, but it was a kind of a spurious faith as well. A faith that, in the hindsight, like of the great discoveries of the time, wasn't really faithful to the gospel of Jesus of Nazareth. It was a faith that was mixed up with the quiescence and an acceptance of the status quo. So we got into the thing in Latin America, like obviously liberation movements about the poor and the option for the poor, and this was the key perspective of the reform of the church. I myself spent a few days with the great Father Tom Berry in the early 80s. Tom had become very much involved with missionaries in the Philippines, in Mindanao, and we talked a lot in those days, about the importance of uniting and dovetailing and dialogue between the 2 perspectives, because they were into the environmental thing, as far as I know, first in the world, in the world of the South, right? But right now, we're all in the same boat. And as has been said time and time again, the ones that are suffering more is the poor. Yeah. The 3 most vulnerable places on the earth, according to the IPC report, CCP report, the second last one, are in this order: Bangladesh, Honduras, and Peru. And that's because of the prevalence of flooding. So, who are the people that suffer? When the waters rise and when flooding happens, And from phenomena like La Corriente del Niño, it's the poor. Yeah? We're all going down together. But the rich, to use the metaphor, they're going first class. The poor are in the same boat. There's far more of them, but there's no distinction here. There's no winners. And that's the important thing. So when we hold on very strongly, and I think the Latin American Church humbly has given the Universal Church a perspective about the theological option for the poor based on the kingdom that Jesus proclaims and announces, and that's here to stay. Even though there's a bit of an allergy about it, like, over the last 20, 30 years because of all the stuff that we're aware of and the role of the, what do you call it, the doctrine of the faith group in the Vatican, and all this stuff that happened to wonderful theologians. But thanks be to God, I think we're breathing fresh air again, and that's very, very important and wonderful to be able to say and to celebrate.
I just wanted to add something
Yeah,
concerning anthropocentrism. I hope the mistake is not being made here in understanding what anthropocentrism is. Means man turning in on himself or herself. In other words, where they institute themselves as the center, and so much so that everything else does not matter. My approach to this is man, yes, is the prime creature, but in relation to everything else that God created. This is the only kind of anthropology that is acceptable when we are discussing issues of natural resources, etc. Man is an intersubjective, relational being. It is impossible for the human person to be a human person without being in that kind of intersubjective, relational connection with the rest of creation. To do otherwise would be to institute the human person as the beginning and the end. And I don't think this was God's intention at all. God's intention was to embed man in creation and instruct him to never be alone, but to be in relationship, an intersubjective relationship with all other creation. And anytime that the human person veered away from that, we had all kinds of problems in history.
Let me respond to that. I think when we speak of anthropocentrism, basically it does not deny the fact that we actually are in relation with nature. But what kind of relationship do you have there? Do you speak of a kind of relationship where you actually speak of nature or the other creatures having only instrumental value in relation to human needs? And I think that is what is trying to be overcome. Of course, it is not to relinquish human leadership in the whole of created world, but we redefine the meaning of that leadership or that dominion. That dominion somehow is understood not anymore in terms of domination, but in terms of service. Service to the other dimensions of the world of nature. In the same way that we have begun to understand the meaning of authority, not to be able to just to impose oneself on the other, but precisely to in a way be at the service of the other. Willis Jenkins actually talks about a stewardship model in a way that conforms to our understanding of Jesus, because he connects stewardship with redemption, just as he would identify eco-justice with sanctification and deification associated with eco-spirituality. And here, he speaks of Jesus as the #1 exemplar of how it is to connect with nature. And he says here, the image that we have of Jesus in terms of his attempt to be able to save humanity and to save the world somehow also in the process. Because he says, you save the world, and in such a process you also save humanity. Here, he actually heightens the idea of a suffering servant. Somebody who dies to oneself so that you become, in a way, a life-giving force to the other. And that is how I understand when we speak of anthropocentrism being overcome in those times. I think.
Okay, at this time, we will open the questions to the audience. Please use the microphone that's there up front. Does anybody have questions for our... Please come forward. Thank you.
My question is specifically to Rolando and Edward, then the rest of the panel can answer. When you talk about life, I hear that life, especially in the context of the last conversation about anthropocentrism. What do you mean by life? Are you defining human life without actually embodying its connection, so with other life forms? So really, when we talk about life affirming, I think that's always a big problem with discourse on anthropocentrism. So I would like to understand what you mean by life.
Thank you. I expected a question like that to come up because affirming, first of all, the human person is an embodied subject. It is not simply, as we say in Nigeria, half or do, but precisely because of the flesh, precisely because of the word becoming flesh. This is how salvation came into the world. There was no other way that we would have been saved except by the word becoming flesh. And from that point on, human life, other life forms, got accentuated. God lifted, as it were. By the very fact of the word of God becoming flesh, all life got a lift. And from then on, it was not possible anymore for life, not just human life, but life in all its ramifications in creation, to become wholesome and to become central to God's plan for salvation. So whenever we talk about life, we should not be perceived as referring merely to human life, but human life in relation to all other life forms, which is why stewardship, the notion of stewardship as dominion rather than domination, is key to our understanding. Stewardship as a service to life, all life. That's my understanding.
And we further reflecting on what Father Edward mentioned, I think when we speak of life, we basically speak first of something most fundamental, and that's common to all. That's why some movements talk about biocentrism, okay? As a way of trying to see our identification with the whole reality, because the whole cosmic order is somehow permeated with life in that sense. And We are part of that. We are interconnected with that life. But of course, when we speak also of stewardship in a way and virtues in understanding further that life, there is something also that we can speak about life because it's humanity that associates meaning to life. What is the meaning of one's life in the world? And that puts us into the whole question of values, no? Order of values in that sense. And it is here that what I would like to put forward, in fact, is that the meaning of life that becomes most somehow superior in terms of our understanding of that life is a life that is given for all. That is a life that is the service, especially of the other. When our life becomes life-giving, I think that is when we, in a way, discover the real meaning of what that life really should be.
And mind you, Louis Janssens also speaks of the human person as being part of the material world. So it never gives the human person any height beyond that. We always are part of the material world. That should make us humble, I think.
I think there's some great minds here this afternoon. People like Bob Schreiber would have a particularly enlightening commentary to make on this conversation. But I would totally agree with the previous speakers. We have already stressed the whole relational part of life and the interdependence. We all know we wouldn't survive for more than a couple of minutes without oxygen. We wouldn't survive without sunshine. We wouldn't survive without plants, without animals. So there is an intrinsic interrelatedness between the different dimensions, species of life. But I think part of the problem is that we're still suffering from a kind of a hangover from the kind of negative effects of the whole period of modernity. That modernity and the Enlightenment obviously gave us lots of wonderful things, scientific stuff, advances, the world as we know it today. We are all children of modernity, and we enjoy the benefits of modernity. But more and more the discussion in groups like ourselves take on a form of a critique of modernity. And here we're dealing with this reality where we have accustomed ourselves, consciously or unconsciously, to dissociate ourselves with interrelationality and interdependence. And we have exaggerated the independence of the human. And that's just nonsense. It probably appears in the manuals, the textbooks, and everything like that. We're finding more and more that our real sense of our humanity and our celebration of humanity is a relationship of stewardship, as Rolando pointed out. I think the church has always had an uncomfortable relationship with the body. That's been, I think everybody would agree, it was expressed at different moments of history, the Manichaean thing, the Puritan business, the body as seen as something negative, as something evil, from the very first. Docetism was a heresy of the 2nd century, where people exaggerated the divinity of Christ to the detriment of the humanity of Christ. I'm one of the senior citizens here this afternoon, and I remember in my days in the seminary I was taught by Docetist professors. They were heretics. Yeah. One day I was bold enough to put up my hand in the class, and I accused the professor of Docetism. I failed the exam. So I think the important point is, where are we today No, that it's not just an intellectual discussion. It's how are we as Christians, as followers of Christ, as people called to give witness to the kingdom, in what kind of condition are we? Our minds, our reading of the scriptures, our freedom, our energy, to be able to give real witness with energy and with joy to the huge problems that are facing us at this stage. I suppose it depends on whether you see the glass as half full or half empty. You know? It's easy enough to say it in an environment like this that the glass is more than half full. But there are days, obviously, when the feeling would be something different. Personally, I try to think, and I think I'm convinced, that we're in the beginnings of a wonderful moment. And I don't know what the future holds, nobody does. We're going to be a different type of church, but we are at the beginning of something exciting.
Any question? I'd be shocked if Don didn't have a question. So.
I've changed my question about 3 times because of the discussion, but let me just try this. I'm very interested in the networking across the conferences. I think that's one of the most exciting things that I've heard in this whole conference. And I guess my question is there a plan yet in place in terms of how that relationship will play out? It sounds like it's very new, and so probably not, but I'm excited to hear about it, and I would hope that there would be some practical networking, not only across, but also down and up in terms of the various ways that those kinds of dialogues are communicated. So that's a question. But as the conversation progressed, I guess what keeps coming to mind that I find helpful when I teach environmental ethics and theology around the notion, again, of anthropology, anthropocentric piece, is to keep in mind, again, this is Franciscan theology, lesson 3, that in John Duns Scotus, he talks about haçaitas, that is the particularity, the distinctiveness of not only the bouquet of roses as roses, but each rose, and that is the intrinsic value played out probably to the nth degree as we know it in theology. The other thing is in Aquinas, he talks about all of the God's self-expression in all of the creation, in all of the varieties and ways, creatures of every sort and size and shape. And I think some of those kinds of images are helpful, even catechetically, to talk about how we can move away from this superiority of the human being in all ways. If you ever tried to swim against a dolphin, or if you ever tried to conquer the Ebola bacteria, there's strengths and weaknesses across the whole divide. And I think in terms of trying to talk about that, it's really helpful to just broaden the conversation sometimes a little bit too, to both in terms of tradition, in terms of back reflection, to help see that this doesn't just come out of nowhere, but it's been with us for a long time. We just express it very differently. So I'd like to hear more about the question.
I would like to address the question, the first one in particular, about networking. In a postmodern milieu, community building were somehow very, very, common, consistent commitments may not be as easy as it could be. But what I noticed, because I interviewed different big groups in the Philippines, the representatives of big organizations who are very well networked, I think considering the complexity of the environmental crisis, each group focuses on particular areas. Like one group could focus on waste management, and you could talk about eco-waste coalition across different organizations, those who are engaged in that, and they intersect in terms of their interests. So another group may be interested in the area of reforestation. Another group may be very interested in anti-mining ventures of big industries. So I think it's not easy anymore to be able to talk in terms of very, very big abstract concepts to which people could connect meaningfully. Networking is done more in terms of intersections on particular interests, very, very specific interests that can actually be experienced across nations in the different regions as well as even in international order. But of course, it does not mean that capacities of this group to be able to put forward legislative agenda first in the level, in the national level, even in the regional level, is equally possible. But again, on very, very specific issues, I think. That's my impression.
I thought the prof meant networking between the continents. I thought she meant something like that, yeah. Yes, I'm also very excited to hear Peter talking about the initiatives that they are taking. In my own country, Nigeria, the National Conference of Bishops gave a mandate to the regional conference, to the Niger Delta bishops. They say, you live there, you wear the shoe and you possibly know where it pinches. Why don't you take up these issues of the Niger Delta, oil theft, artisanal refining, poverty, violence, all of those issues, and discuss them. Meet the people who matter, discuss them, articulate these issues for us, and then advise us. Indeed, when you make a statement, automatically you are guaranteed our support. So I think this is what has happened there, and I have been steering these bishops' discussions on those issues, and I have also managed to connect the Bishops' Forum with another forum of NGOs that are environmental NGOs operating nationwide. So it's not just anymore simply a group of bishops discussing these matters, but what the bishops are saying is being re-echoed by civil society organizations within the region and in the country. So slowly we are kind of walking it up so that, as Peter already mentioned a while ago, that the relevance of the church will not remain within the walls of the church, but it will be felt nationally, and that we'll be able to speak while others are also speaking, at least, if not before others are speaking.
Yeah. If I could just kind of interject here, I think another side of this is what kind of Christie was talking about, and I'd like to get her perspective on this, because she was kind of looking at this from the demand side. She was looking at the consumer side of this, and I think that's a side that I think also needs to be addressed in this kind of.
I worked in the Amazon in Brazil for a while, looking at alternatives to deforestation, and what struck me most was that. Closer? Okay. So I worked for a while in the Amazon looking at alternatives to deforestation, and I loved the Amazon, and I very much wanted to, I think a part of me very much wanted to stay there and work on those issues, but honestly, what was difficult for me to accept at the time is that the drivers are coming from first world countries. So if we don't change our consumption, if we don't change the choices we make here, then we have cascading impacts globally, and sometimes those impacts can be good, but there are oftentimes intended and unintended consequences of our actions that are mostly hidden from view, and it makes it easy to ignore them. And I think, that's really where I come from with this. I would be happy if, irrespective of how much I love sea salted caramels, no one ever bought me a Christmas present again. But I understand that I'm swimming upstream. My family completely disagrees with me on this point. But I really do feel that our actions as developed countries are, oftentimes what we most need to change, and that, it's incredibly important to do the work, to network, to fight deforestation on the ground, but as long as there's demand, then, that only gets you partway there.
Network is here to stay, whether we like it or not. And it's not easy. And it can be both exciting and painful. Because most of us didn't grow up and live our lives networking. We were all sort of, our comfort zone is within our own group, whatever tribe we belong to. The big enemies in the context of this conversation are things like fragmentation, isolation, going it alone, separation. And that doesn't stand up as credible witness if we're talking about delivering the goods as a church at a moment like this. So it's not really about just signing on to be part of a network, because it questions our mindset, our reflexes, our way of doing things, and we have to sort of reinvent ourselves in a new, become a kind of a new subject, so to speak. And we have found out, it's no big deal that some people and some groups are good at it, and others are maybe slower. Bishops particularly are great. The old diocese is the important thing, even though they belong to bishops' conferences and things like that. But I think that words like confluence, that's a great Amazonic word. It's kind of a metaphor about the river, the small rivers running in together. These things are becoming part of the future. And in the REPAM, one that I'm involved in, it's very interesting that where the germ of the idea came from was from the smallest Amazonic country, from Ecuador, from the periphery, from the outsiders. And the other element was that there's an experience that's happening over the last 15 or 20 years in the Amazon, comprised of numerically quite a small group of missionaries, but they're all an intercongregational group, founded by an Italian Jesuit man by the name of Pelani. He died a few years ago. But right now, there's this, what we call it, an equipo itinerante. And they have concentrated their action on the border areas, the frontier areas of the Amazon, places like Tabatinga. Christie might know it, in Brazil, in the border between Brazil and Colombia, Leticia, Cobica, Bolivia and Peru. And the idea is that these groups, there's Consolatas, there's Franciscans, there's Jesuits. Imagine networking with Jesuits, and still they're the pioneers today. Like they have discovered that it's important, to join forces with other people, and quite another number of groups, and particularly lay people. They have the freedom of movement. They have the ability to have a better sort of reading of the situation. They're more open to investigation.
We can take one more question.
These are the people that can network with the networks of religious orders.
All right. One more question.
Yes. There's a number of questions on this one. One is, I feel like there's an elephant in the room. And what I mean by that is the sense in which we name, in part what the issue is, which I see as very structural. And what I mean by structural, it's global, corporate capitalism. And then, although the response can be one that involves lifestyle changes, don't you think there's something more fundamental in terms of it being linked to social movements for change in the global north? I mean, that's part of what I'm feeling a little frustration about. That it's not simply just an issue of lifestyle changes, or is it green technologies, which are important, but what's central is addressing the question of corporate capital and its accumulation and dispossession.
Okay, we've got 3 minutes to unpack that. Go.
Yeah. I would like to respond to that. It is true that the whole issue here is really global, very complex, and in fact structural, and it has to be addressed in that level. And I think, like what I presented actually does not in itself negate that dimension. But what is also equally important is to be able to see how it could start also, or even in a way coexists with having to address values of individuals. And the kind of individuals that we produce here are not the individuals who are self-contained or individuals who would have virtues like this or that, but it's a kind of individuals who could stand up actually for the environment and be able to be part precisely of that network that can address more critically structural realities. That's why you move from there and then they go up. But the point is, we have to be able to somehow clarify what kind of individuals, more or less, are expected who could stand up for real significant transformative changes in society today.
I just wanted to add that corporate capital gives you the impression that
It's either this way or not at all. But I do not agree with that. I do not accept that. Because it's possible to have global corporate capital coexisting very effectively, efficiently with sustainability, with people's enhancement of people's lives, etc. It's both and. That is possible. It's not always either or, which is the impression that global corporate capital gives you. Thank you.
To praise God, to adore His name, to sing His goodness is exactly what you said. It's to defend life. It's to respect the gift and join together and ensure that life flourishes on earth. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, thy kingdom come. So I think we still have to do a lot of work on what we mean by praise, what we mean by worship, what we mean by adoration of the God of the Bible, which is intimately and inherently linked to the work of justice. Justice in the Bible is sanctity. It's being safely in the presence of the God of Israel, the God of Jesus.
Christie gets the last word.
Yes, and I agree that we could use capitalism for the common good. Capitalism was long ago framed as a moral framework, and it would be great to go back to the moral framework, defining the moral framework under which capitalism could exist.
Okay, and we can continue the discussion in our 30-minute break that we have now. Let's give a great round of applause for our